You're listening to the Coast Business Radio podcast.
David Crisafulli is the LNP member for Broadwater, Shadow Minister for Environment, Science and the Great Barrier Reef, and Shadow Minister for Tourism. David served as a Queensland Minister for Local Government, Community Recovery and Resilience between 2012 and 2015, following 2 terms as a councillor and Deputy Mayor of the Townsville City Council between 2004 and 2012. Following the 2015 state election, David established a small business offering planning and government strategy advice and relocated his family to the beautiful northern Gold Coast. David, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the intro, and beautiful northern Gold Coast it certainly is, Mike.
Can you surf?
No, terribly. I'm a land mammal, 100%. I can't surf, I struggle to swim, not great on the boat, I never catch fish. No, if there was a body designed for soil, it's mine.
It was funny, reading in the paper once, somebody said, about Tony Abbott. If Tony Abbott was to walk across Sydney Harbour, headlines would be, Tony Abbott can't swim. Is that is that the same for yourself?
No, I can't swim. I can't walk on water. And if you want an honest critique, my wife will give you one. She'll tell you that she'll pick out those character flaws well and truly, and that's what their job's for. I have a wife and 2 teenage daughters, and they exist to make sure that all of my flaws are well and truly exposed each and every day.
Yes, wives do that, don't they?
And so they should.
That's
so
right.
They should.
How concerned are you about the impact on small business because of this coronavirus? And are you happy with the response from the federal and state governments?
I'm deeply concerned, and I reckon there's nowhere that will bear the brunt of it more than the Gold Coast. We have diversified our economy in recent years, and I'm proud of that as a city to see it maturing, but we still have a massive reliance on tourism, and it is going to be tourism that will struggle for years. And if people attempt to sugarcoat this and think that somehow within a couple of weeks we're going to arise from this slumber and everything's going to roar back into action, they're wrong. That's not going to be the case. It's going to be a long, hard road ahead. International tourism will change for a generation. Just imagine the logistics of who flies where and how they can. So we're going to have to find a way to re-energise the sector domestically, and that's going to be a big challenge. It's a challenge that our city is up to, but there's going to be a lot of heartache, and there's a lot of heartache for all businesses, whether they're in tourism or not. And I think we're going to have a real period of uncertainty, and I want to see governments respond in the way that they have to, and that is not just to assist the employees, and that's absolutely fit and proper to do so, but also to assist the small business people, because they've put everything on the line. And as I had a business colleague say to me the other day, and he's in tourism, he said, if I made a stuff up and I overreached and I went into a sector that I shouldn't have and I went broke, I'd cop it on the chin. But to see everything I've worked for a couple of decades go down tube because of something that is beyond my control, let's call it for what it is, because archaic practices, marketplaces overseas, which has caused the disease, and that should be stopped, and that's another argument for another day. But to see that slip through his fingertips is soul-destroying, and I've had too many conversations with too many grown adults where they're quite rightly breaking down in absolute heartache to know that this is going to be an easy fix, and we've got to work together to get to the end of it.
We've got to be very careful to make sure that the cure is not worse than the actual disease. Yeah,
that's the balance. But finding that balance is very tricky, and you only have to have a look at New York, where they probably let their guard down a little bit, and Italy, where they were the first in Europe, and so nobody saw what was coming, to know how devastating it can be if you don't get ahead of the game. Now, that is the balance that has to be found. Now, the challenge for us is we did a very good job as a nation getting in early. And we are an island, so locking it down and ensuring that those overseas cases didn't translate to domestic ones. What the challenge is now is knowing how can we arrive to a situation where we don't strangle the economy for too long without risking those health implications. So what does that look like? Well, it looks like turning things back on ever so slightly. No one's suggesting that overnight we should say, okay, job's done, let's all go back to the way we were. Because if you do that, you're going to have to wait years. You're going to have to wait for a vaccine, and that's not plausible. It's about finding a balance, turning things back on piece by piece and making sure that you can balance your health outcomes, but that your economy doesn't have to be on life support for years.
Or tourism, the lifeblood of the Gold Coast, the impact of border restrictions. You got to have people to have tourism. And at the moment, well, you sort of can't get in.
No, it's going to be a tough road, and that overseas market won't be the same for a long time. So what do I think tourism looks like? Well, first, our operators need help to get by. They need help to be able to pay those expenses that are still going to tick over. That's why the JobKeeper is a wonderful initiative, and I credit where it's due. The Prime Minister's, the way that's been done is good and fit and proper and keeps people in a job. I want to see banks do a little bit more. I don't think saying that you're going to defer some interest repayments and then capitalise it, I don't see that as being overly generous. I don't see that as wearing the pain. I certainly don't think the insurance sector has pulled their weight. Far from it. Spoke to a business operator the other day who phoned them and said, look, I am really hurting and my trade has copped a bath. What can you do? And the response on the end of the phone was, well, look, don't pay your April premium, but we will need it this financial year. Now, what planet does somebody live on to think that somehow May and June are going to be great trading months for someone who has had to shut their business during this time? That's cold, it's callous, it's out of touch. And I want to see those guys pull their weight. And I also want to see state government and local government wear a bit more of the pain as well. I think the feds have been prepared to put their hand up and say, yep, this is going to be a big hole that we're going to have to get ourselves out of in years to come. But the financial response has been swift, and it's been what's needed. I think it's time that particularly the state starts showing some love. Talking of deferring payroll tax for a few months, that doesn't help anyone. Businesses either aren't paying payroll tax at the moment because they've had to put staff off, or they're not trading and it's being topped up by JobKeeper. Either way, there's no scenario in a few months' time that everything's going to be hunky-dory. So call it for what it is. It's not a deferral. You've got to waive it. You've got to help people. You've got to look at land tax. You've got to look at all of those things to try and get people alive and to try and get them motivated that there's a better future. But there's some tough times ahead, and I never dance around that. Are we up to it? You better. But is there going to be some pain and some suffering for many months to come? And sadly, the answer is yes.
Trade-exposed firms that have lost markets because of the coronavirus will be able to apply for loans of up to $50 million to help save their business. Now, the credit facility worth $500 million in total will be available to small and medium exporters, including tourism providers that have been profitable before this pandemic but are now unable to secure loans from commercial sources. So the question is there a problem with banks stumping up small business?
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to call it for how it is, and that is that what the banks did quite cleverly is they realised how dire this was going to be. So they got in early and said, we're on your side and we're going to you're going to delay your interest repayments. But as the crisis has unfolded, I think people have seen that is an insignificant response. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't something, and good on them for putting their hand up to do something, but it's not commensurate with the pain that everyone else is wearing. And I particularly look towards the landlords as people who are really wearing the pain, and they've been demonised. The legislation that is due to go before the state parliament next week demonises landlords. It demonises them, and that's not right. And I don't get me wrong, everyone's got to wear some pain, but at the moment it seems a lot of one-way traffic where the real big boys aren't wearing a lot of pain, and it's all coming down to people who've scrimped and saved and worked hard, mum and dad investors who've either bought a commercial property or a residential one, and I don't want to see their hard work and the reward for effort that they've put across many years. I don't want to see that flush down the drain because everyone else isn't willing to wear pain, and I'll stick up for them every day of the week.
The self-funded retirees rely on, if not all of that, at least a great chunk of that rent. It must be a terrible place to be in at the moment. These aren't multi-millionaires and stuff. These are just mums and dads that have invested into property. They expect the law of contract to be upheld. That's
right, and some of the draft changes are, quite frankly, abhorrent. When you have a situation that you can't determine at the end of the lease to put a family member in a property, when you have a situation that the tenant has sole exclusive decision on whether to stay in a property or not, that completely undermines property law. When you have a government say that you don't have to produce documentation to be able to show that you've been impacted for asking for a reduction in your rent, that is just absolutely Orwellian stuff, and it's not fair. Now, don't get me wrong, landlords have to wear a bit of pain as well, and where there's good relationships, I've seen that unfold already, where landlord and tenant have both got together and working through a solution. But you can't have legislation that is all one-way traffic, and I tell you, I cannot believe the feedback we have received in the office. I haven't seen issue light up the phones like this. They're angry. And rightly so, they're angry because they've seen everything they've worked for over many years in jeopardy. And we're going to fight this tooth and nail because it is fundamentally not fair. What are your priorities for tourism on the Gold Coast? To get it going again by being the place domestically that people turn to. Now, what I want to do is I want those businesses and indeed those regions to maintain a connection with Australians who have been there either in the last year or in the last few years. I want those businesses to continue to make a virtual connection, and that can be through social media, it can be through direct mail, almost like keeping the engine idling while you're waiting to take off at the lights. You keep it idling. You don't shut it off and then try and restart it when it's time to take off. So I want to keep those connections going. But when we emerge from this hibernation, I want people, firstly across Queensland, to say, you know what, we haven't been to the coast for a couple of years. We've been bunkered down in this house for far too long. Let's just go and spend a couple of weeks there and have a few drinks and go out to some decent restaurants and lie on a beach and do all those things we want. So that's the first challenge. Then we have to look, once the border restrictions are moved, how do we convince the same people across the nation to come to the place where they see. Now, with a broader hat on, with my shadow tourism hat, I want them also to rediscover their love for the Barrier Reef and go to Cairns and Whitsundays and rediscover their love for the outback, which is a great experience. Now, that can be done. We have an amazing tourism offering. Tourism was doing it tough before this crisis.
It was.
Heaven knows how bad it is now. But from this, I want to see a domestic market emerge where people turn back to their old favourites as a way of blowing up the cobwebs after spending far too much time at home. And if you're anything like me, two teenage daughters in a house, I'm ready for a holiday, and it's only been a few weeks. But you never know, it might go on longer, and by that stage, you might have your own apartment just all for yourself. I think that works very well, actually. Yeah, we'll do week on, week off. Yep, I like it. I'll ring the wife immediately. Once we get through all this, what's the big picture? An economy that continues to diversify as it has in recent times. Now, the Gold Coast once upon a time was a one-trick pony. It was just tourism. In recent times, we've seen a diversification. Now, what that looks like to me is we never, ever want to turn our back away from tourism because we do it well. We do it better than anyone. But this place also can be a hub for government services. Big city, it's well located, that's the first thing. It should be a medical hub. population, an ageing population, a great lifestyle, great smarts with our universities. So let's build on the medical. Let's build on the tertiary and the learning. And I know that's going to look and feel different with the international stuff, but that's also a string to our bow. But above all, what this has highlighted to everybody across the country is that you don't have to be cooped up in a Sydney headquarters to do business. People can work more remotely, and they will put a higher premium on lifestyle. And I would suggest to you, someone right now sitting in Western Sydney, in an old fibro place, which is still today worth north of $1 million, even with all of this crisis, I reckon when they look at their lifestyle and think to themselves, well, if this is what life's meant to be, maybe we should put a greater importance on a family, on having a good life. Where better would there be to be able to sell up that place, move to the coast, put a little bit of money in the bank after you've paid off your mortgage there, put a bit of money in the bank because your property better buying here than there, and live a decent lifestyle where in the afternoon you can get a bit of sand through your toes, when you can go up to the hinterland on the weekend and head up to Tamborine and have a wonderful time, where you have a city that is cosmopolitan enough that it's got all the great eateries and it's got all the entertainment you need. It's got national sporting teams, and yet it's still a city where people matter. And I reckon from all of this there'll be a sharpening focus on what the importance of lifestyle, and I reckon there's nowhere better than the Gold Coast to capitalise.
Totally agree with you. Cold beer tonight, but not down by the beach, in the backyard with the birds that are driving us absolutely insane. David Crisafulli, LNP member for Broadwater and Shadow Minister for Environment and Science and the Great Barrier Reef and Shadow Minister for Tourism. That's a mouthful. David, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on, Mike. Appreciate it very, very much.